Greetings from the new Votes for Women space at the Nashville Public Library's Special Collections Center. Inspired by Tennessee's role as the final state to ratify the 19th Amendment, the Votes for Women space serves as a destination for discovery and inquiry, and to introduce our audience to new narratives and themes in America's history. We can't wait to see you again when the library opens to engage in new conversations about women's history, equality, democracy, and the right to vote.
Good afternoon. My name is Nathan Buttrey, and on behalf of Humanities Tennessee, I want to welcome you to the 32nd Annual Southern Festival of Books. Humanities Tennessee would also like to say a special thank you to their key sponsors, the Metro Nashville Arts Commission, the Ingram Content Group, Tennessee Arts Commission, Vanderbilt University, and Parnassus Books. Before we get started, I want to share a bit about our session. These are unique times, and the book festival is also unique this year. So we really appreciate everyone being here and Humanities Tennessee carrying on with the event. If you'd like to purchase a book, please use the Parnassus book link, and that helps us financially. There will be 15 minutes of questions towards the end, so please post those in StreamYard. Our author today is Jordan Ritter Conn. He is a staff writer for The Ringer. He previously worked at Grantland and the ESPN magazine. He has written for the New York Times, Sports Illustrated. He's a two-time finalist for the Livingston Award, and his work has been cited or recognized by the New Yorker, the Atlantic, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and Slate. He's a graduate of Lee University and the UC Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism. He currently lives in Nashville. Jordan's here today to discuss his new book, The Road from Raqqa, a story of brotherhood, borders, and belonging. With Jordan today is one of the brothers from the story, Riyad Alkasem, who I'm going to let Jordan introduce. So Jordan, Riyad, welcome.
Thanks so much, Nathan. And yeah, I'm thrilled to be here as a Nashvilleian and a Tennessean. This event is one that I love to attend every single year, and it's been a dream to be a part of it. And so even under these circumstances and these strange times, it's a real honor to be a part of this. And I could not be more thrilled to be here with Riyad. Riyad Alkasem is the chef and owner at Café Raqqa in Hendersonville, Tennessee. It is a restaurant that has been received more accolades than I can possibly count. Been voted Sumner County's favorite restaurant in the Nashville scene's Best of Nashville issue many years. And he is one of the most fascinating men, one of the most fascinating people I've ever known. He is someone who I met and wanted to write a book about him and his family. And Riyad, thanks so much for being here. Yeah, I'm gonna talk about this book and about your story, and then we'll hopefully get a chance to talk together in a bit. And so I'll start by kind of telling the story of how Riyad and I met. In 2015, I was working for ESPN the magazine, and my job there was oftentimes to find stories where sports kind of intersected with the rest of the world. One of the great things about writing about sports sometimes is the fact that sports intersects with absolutely everything else. So when you're writing about sports, you can find yourself writing about race or religion or politics or gender or business or crime or anything. And at this point in time, I found myself writing about the intersection between sports and Syria's civil war, which was and remains ongoing. And I had been sent over to southern Turkey, to the Syria-Turkey border, to do some interviews with members of a soccer team who had been displaced by the war. And these were people whose many of their homes had been destroyed. Many of them had been soldiers in the war fighting against the regime of Bashar al-Assad. Many of them had, all of them had been uprooted in one way or another, and now found themselves trying to piece together a new life in Turkey. And my job was to tell their story. And I went over there and spent a few weeks reporting that piece. And then I came back to my home in Nashville. And while I was here, I needed some help. I needed someone who could sit with me and place some phone calls to the other side of the world, where we could interview some of these young men, some of these soccer players. And I don't speak Arabic. These guys who I was interviewing, for the most part, don't speak much English, and so I needed someone who was familiar with the conflict in Syria and someone who spoke the Syrian dialect of Arabic. And so through, my wife is connected to the man who's at the time the president of the Islamic Center of Nashville, Rashid Fakhruddin, and I asked him, "Hey, do you know anyone who can help me out with this?" And he just said to me, "Yes, of course. I know exactly the man. Just get in your car, drive out to Hendersonville, um, go to this restaurant called Café Raqqa, walk in, introduce yourself to the chef, and he'll give you everything you need." Um, and I thought, okay, that sounds great. I'll give that a shot. And but I was also a little bit confused because I had just spent several weeks reporting in this part of the world and talking to people, some of whom had been in the city of Raqqa, Syria. And Raqqa was, at that moment in time, famous as kind of the hub of ISIS, the de facto capital, they called it, of their self-described caliphate. And it was a city in the desert that had been relatively small and unknown for many years, and now was known on the world stage as this home to this terror group. And I just found myself wondering, what in the world is a restaurant doing in Hendersonville, Tennessee, named after Raqqa, Syria? Uh, and I wanted to find out, and I needed help with the story, and so I walked into the restaurant, and I did exactly as told. I introduced myself to the chef, who is Riyad, and he took me to the back, and we sat and we called my source and talked to him for a long period of time, and then afterwards we talked with each other. And I as I heard him tell his own story, there was a part of me that thought, "Oh wow, this is a story I really want to be telling." Now I was deeply invested in the story that had sent me to that part of the world. I was deeply invested in the story about this soccer team, but the way Riyad spoke about his journey to America as an immigrant, and about his family's journey and the questions that they were weighing at this time as they kind of debated their own future, made me drawn to it in a way that I'm not sure I'd ever been drawn to a story before. I wanted to sit with him, to hear about his life, to travel with him, to meet his family, to learn their stories, and to piece it together. And that was just the beginning. That was in at this point late or early 2016. Riyad and I spoke again intermittently over the next year or so, and then began speaking more in earnest after the 2016 election. And that ultimately led me to the point of asking him what I basically wanted to ask him from the first time I met him, which was, "Can I write a book about your family?" And now, several years later, here we are. And this book, The Road from Raqqa, it's Riyad's story, and it's a story of his younger brother Bashar, as well as other members of their family. But it really revolves around those two characters, those two brothers, and they're incredibly fascinating in different ways. Riyad came to America because he fell in love with the idea of this country. He was a student at the University of Aleppo, and he took a class called American Government that transfixed him, that caused him to kind of to fall in love with our system, and make him want to come here and find out more about it. Honestly, with the hopes that he could then return to Syria and work to institute a similar system there. So he was this brother driven by a sense of restlessness, a sense of a desire to wander, to explore, and the sense of idealism. And so Riyad's story is a story of leaving home as a young man in search of chasing a certain kind of dream. And the book tells the story of the ways in which that dream was complicated over the years. And perhaps hopefully Riyad will get a chance to speak a bit about where he sees that dream today. But that is his story. It's the story of this kind of fraught relationship with the home of his birth in Raqqa in Syria, and his new home. I say new. He's been an American citizen for more than 2 decades at this point. But this other place where he has now built a home. And then his younger brother Bashar has a very different story. In some ways, Bashar chose the life that Riyad left behind. Riyad had an opportunity to be a judge when he left Syria. Bashar remained there and built a legal career, and was on the precipice of becoming a judge in 2013 as the country spiraled deeper into war. And Bashar's story is a story of choosing stability, of choosing to remain in a place where the family is rooted, and then finding that can be, the sense of home that you have can be disrupted in profound and violent ways. Bashar's story really revolves around wrestling with the question of whether to leave or to stay as Syria fell deeper and deeper into civil war. And so much of the book revolves around kind of both of them wrestling with those own questions in themselves, and also wrestling with kind of their relationship with each other and the things that each of them wanted for the other. Riyad, a lot of the book centers around Riyad's journey in 2013 to try to convince Bashar and the rest of his family to leave and to escape the war and hopefully to be resettled in the United States, and the resistance that he meets because of the love that they feel for that city and for that home that they've built. And the book is, while it's very much about each of these brothers, it is also very much about their city. It's very much about Raqqa, and the city that no one really knew much of anything about for a very long time. A city that people in other parts of Syria kind of looked down on and made fun of as almost a backwater for a very long time. That was then made famous by the emergence of this terror group. This book tries to tell the story of that city in a way that hopefully does justice to the rich history there and the rich culture there, and the deep love that both Riyad and Bashar have for Raqqa. And so I'm going to read just a quick excerpt. This is the prologue to the book. That this is the part of the book that Riyad and I went over this so many times to make sure we had every detail right. And I know it's a part that means a lot to him, and it's a part that kind of sets up so much of the story to come. They used to tell a story in the desert about an 18th century warrior named Ibrahim, who led an Arab army across the Levant, known long before as Mesopotamia, fighting on horseback and on camel for the Ottoman Empire. Ibrahim was loyal to the Ottomans and ruthless to their enemies, and so the empire's leaders rewarded him with a gift. It wasn't much, just a swath of land in the desert, tucked inside the elbow of the Euphrates River. Some of the land bare and desolate, some of it green and alive. Only Ibrahim didn't care much for land. He was a warrior, not a settler. So he left the land untouched and continued to roam the Levant and to wage battle, uninterested in any place where he could not find a fight. Ibrahim had a son named Isa and a grandson named Hamid, also nomadic warriors. And Hamid had a son named Taha. When they would tell this story centuries later, the boys and girls of the desert would speculate that Taha did not like to fight like his father, grandfather, and great grandfather. Because if he liked to fight, then he would have continued roaming in search of violence. But instead, he came to the land that had now been passed down to him. And he wondered if perhaps he should stay there, if perhaps he should build a life. Taha found a spot that he liked. Dangerous tribes inhabited the land's western and eastern edges, but here in the center was a river and an ancient wall, long ago abandoned. And the river and wall together formed something of a cocoon. And Taha decided that here he would be safe. Here he would stay. He put up a tent and decided to make coffee. He took a stone rod and used it like a mortar and pestle to smash the beans. When they were fully ground, he mixed them with water he boiled on a fire. He waited. A breeze wafted in from the Euphrates, carrying the smell of coffee across the desert to small and scattered tribes. They took the smell of the coffee as an invitation. One by one, members of each tribe came to Taha and joined him. Together, they sipped. Taha asked them to stay. Settle here, he said, and let's work together, share our resources to build a community. To convince them, he offered pieces of his land. Some said yes, and more tribes came. As the years passed, Taha gave away more pieces of his land until there were 12 sub-tribes in total. And together they decided the sliver of land just north of their settlement would be the community land, to be divided among every male descendant of every original founder for as long as their city stood. A city, yes, that's what it was now, with homes and markets and mosques and a school. They called it Raqqa. It would stand for centuries, here on this plot of land passed down from Ibrahim to Isa to Hamid to Taha, and its people would remain close-knit, cloistered as they were and uninterested in the outside world. Yet they would always greet visitors with extravagant welcome, providing warm beds and hearty meals and fresh coffee, just as Taha had once done. Taha had a son named Jorf, and Jorf had a son named Hamoud, who had a son named Qasim, who had a son named Muhammad, who had a son named Abdul Rahman, who had several sons, the oldest two of whom he named Riyad and Bashar. And Riyad and Bashar grew up learning the stories of their ancestors and of their city, and they saw themselves as carrying on the traditions passed down from Taha on the land passed down from Ibrahim. And then one day new warriors arrived, and the people of the city looked overhead to see them, an airplane sent by leaders in Damascus or Moscow or Washington, D.C. And those warriors dropped bombs, and those bombs pounded the city until it was barely anything more than what Taha had found on his journey through the Levant so many years ago. And Riyad and Bashar wondered, what makes a city when its people have fled or died? What makes a home when a house has become rubble? What makes a family when brothers and sisters are sent to scatter across the world? And now I want to invite Riyad to speak. And Riyad, I just want that part. As I mentioned, was you and I went over it so many times. You called me in the middle of the night when you were visiting family in another part of the world to make sure that I had some details right. What is it about that story, the story of the founding of the city, that feels so critical to you?
You make me choke every time you hear the story again. It's a foundation. My roots. If I want to go back to any DNA to the city, I find my ancestors in any shape or form for the city, and what it becomes. Have to go back to that one moment when Taha al-Hamid decide he's gonna brew coffee, which is at that time a sign of peace calling, welcoming. Mostly people go either by sound or fire, but if you smell coffee, that means you are safe. That means somebody is opening their home for you, and that's exactly what he started. He started by inviting people to join him. It is very important to me. The importance of this is really shaped up everything I lived through in my life, and to the smallest details I do. I always thought we have an obligation as Alkasems to do better, not only for ourselves, for any place we go to, and to add to any community we participate in. And I thought that's when I came to, and I said, I thought I have a much obligation to learn an American system of hopefully reform the Syrian system. I thought my problem is, or my obligation, bigger than my tribe at this point. After I learned there is a much bigger tribe called Syria we all belong to, I thought this is what I needed to do. They have an obligation. For me, it was an obligation. It was a dream. It was an idealistic voyage. But nonetheless, it was for a higher calling.
Yeah, and another thing that I found myself wanting to ask you is, because you and I have spent so much time sitting and talking with each other, including since the book came out. We still see each other all the time and talk talk a lot. But something that I don't know if we've fully talked about, and that I find myself curious about sitting here now, is what it has been like having your story out in the world in such detail. We as we kind of talked to get your story down on paper, I asked you to talk about some pretty vulnerable things, some difficult things, some rough experiences, some traumatic experiences. And I would imagine that telling those stories to one person is one thing, but knowing that they're out there for anyone to read and encounter is something altogether different. And I'm curious what it has been like for you, having those pieces of yourself kind of laid bare like that at this point.
Well, certainly it comes with some kind of certain anxiety when you make yourself vulnerable. You open up to anybody to read it, and you really don't know how's this story going to land in people's mind and heart and emotion. How they're going to receive it. Reception of the story, not as much worried me, but I was worried about a wrong impression of it. That's the only thing I was worried about. Few things about it I was worried about that people might misunderstood part of the culture, which is probably you could trying to do something good, and I was afraid some reader might get offended and take it in the wrong way. That one thing that worried me. The other thing I felt fulfilling again my life by telling this story. But the most prominent moment after the book was published is I received a call from Bashar, and I share it with you. And he told me, he said, so Bashar left during we are writing the story, and he has an heroic traveling, and he faced so many dangers, and that it took a big toll on him and his family in so many ways, but not to give more details to it. But nonetheless, it was an extremely tear-jerkers, if you want to call it, his trip to where he is now. So he calls me one day, and he kind of, as the best he can read, he doesn't like English is second language to him, and he struggled with it. But he called me and he said, I want to just tell you something. First, I want to thank you and Jordan for doing this. Second, when I left Raqqa City, my mother and my wife and my kids, and I looked behind to a land that our ancestors started and built, I thought, we lost everything. This is it. Like, we built and then we lost. He's the last one from the Alkasem to leave, so he lost everything. And he said, when I read that book, the first few pages of it, it feels like we got it all back. And for me, that's more than anything else I could describe what this book did, and how I'm hoping people just look at it in a light of a different stereotype. To every immigrant or refugee was forced to leave their home because their home happened to be in an area of conflict, not of their own, just that's their destiny and fate to be in that location where so many powers are fighting over. There is so many people displaced, none of their own, none of their fault. They just happen to be there. They are a casualty of clashes of powers. That's what I like people to look at this book from. As far as goes, Bashar story, this is a real story of a man who did not want to leave. He was forced. I did want to leave. It was a choice for me.
It's a powerful story. I've read the book, and I'm curious, Riyad, and even Jordan, if you know, could you tell us what's going on with the family? How is the Alkasem family? And I know they're all over the world, so I'm curious, what kind of update can you give us?
I can give you some. I'm fearing for their safety, because some of them are still in Syria, and
Certainly.
But we're 5 brothers and 2 sisters, and all the brothers all went to college, graduated from college. I'm a lawyer, almost judge. Bashar was nominated for Supreme Court judge in Syria at the time, before the civil war started. I have 2 doctors, brothers, and a businessman, the small little one. And one of my sisters is English literature graduate. The other one is doing a PhD in satellite engineering. So none of that was good enough for them to come to the United States, believe it or not. I wonder what's the qualifications for anybody to come. I want them to be part of this country. I want them to be given to this country too, and be part of it and love it and just live in peace. But I couldn't get them here. Yeah, but they are all safe. My mother's still alive with one of my brothers, living with him. She wants to go back home more than anything else. But we're trying to discourage her as much as we can. She can go now anytime she can.
Mm-hmm.
Extremely dangerous place, Raqqa City now. It's been classified by the United Nations as 80% uninhabitable city. It's destroyed. There's no waters, no running waters, no plumbing, no electricity. And there's mines everywhere you walk. A lot of my friends that I grew up with, every few days, I will hear somebody get killed by either walking in the street or going. Most people couldn't afford to leave, too. That's another sad side of the city here.
Well, as we move into the last part of our session with Q&A, if anyone joining us online has a question, please post it via Facebook Live or YouTube or here in StreamYard, and we'll share those. I have another question. You talked a little bit about your brother-in-law or your brother and sister-in-law and their tear-jerking journey, but there was some humor in the story during that journey, and it was really personal to your sister-in-law. And I was curious, Jordan and Riyad, how much interaction did you guys have with the other family members when you were writing this book? Because that's a really personal story that a really funny moment that she noticed, a very human thing. If you want to tell what it is, that's fine. But how much did the rest of the family contribute to this?
Jordan might be able to, because he really enjoyed that part of the story. So go ahead, Jordan. Yeah.
Jordan, you're on mute. Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
So Aisha is Riyad's sister-in-law, Bashar's wife, and she is she's an incredible woman. So Riyad and I went to Germany, where their family, Bashar and Aisha and their kids now live, and while there, we're there this book is about Riyad and Bashar, and so we're there to spend a lot of time with Bashar. But Bashar is extremely reserved, and he will open up, but it's you have to kind of be patient and take your time, and there were times when he was just holding back perhaps a bit, whereas Aisha is just this incredibly passionate woman who just when she speaks, you just feel all of the everything she has experienced. You can hear it in her voice. You can feel it, and when you're sitting in the room with her, and so I don't know how I would have written Bashar's parts of the book without her voice, because she was just such a captivating storyteller, and so much of the book is told through her experience, and she the moment that you're referring to is I don't think it's a problem to spoil it. So Bashar and Aisha and their children followed what became a kind of well-trod path of refugees out of Syria, crossing the border from Syria into Turkey, remaining in Turkey for a period of time before realizing that there was nothing for them there, and unable to go back to Syria, then making the choice to try to go to Europe, which was at the time admitting a great deal of refugees. And in order to get to Europe, they needed to cross the sea, the Aegean Sea, to get to Greece. And it's this harrowing trip. That there are so many moments that were terrifying. So many moments where they could have died, and where the threat of physical danger was very, very real. But there are also these moments that kind of reminded them of some of the goodness in the world. At times the goodness in other people, and at times just humor. So there was this moment on the boat where Aisha and her children are sitting in the center of this raft. It's a small rubber motorized raft. The same rafts that you saw in the news on showing refugees on their way into Greece, and they're out there in the middle of the night. It is just deathly cold. They are shivering. They are terrified. They can barely see anything except for what is lit up by the moon. And they don't know if they're going to live or die. And right in front of them, there is this couple who is just going back and forth, just absolutely letting each other have it, ripping each other's heads off about who gets the better seat. And like the wife desperately wants to be on the inside. The husband doesn't want the wife to be on the inside. He says that should be my seat, and he has this whole reason why. And Aisha talked about sitting there in this moment, watching this couple, and being just like thinking it was like a show, like they were getting to just watch this kind of interpersonal drama play out in front of them, and everyone on the raft just starts kind of looking at each other and cracking up laughing. And Aisha said something about how she believed that was almost like a gift from God to them, that moment of just humor and levity, and a reminder of the fact that as terrifying as their world was in that moment, it could still be pretty absurdly hilarious too. And so all that to say, having her tell those kinds of stories, whether they be the humorous ones or the much more harrowing ones, was really, really critical to the book.
Excellent. We do have a question from one of our online viewers, and let's see, we're at about 4:49 now. We have about 7 or 8 more minutes before we need to start wrapping up. Riyad, this question's from you, or for you. It's from Deborah. The question is, what made you want to come to the U.S., and have you been satisfied with your experience here?
Well, as Jordan talked about in the beginning, I always want to go somewhere out of Syria, learn different system, different lifestyle. And I took a course in my last year of college called American Government. And I studied a little bit more about the American system. And I like the fact this democratic system has something called checks and balances. And in the book, I describe about some of the crime is being happened, and the Syrian government and his clan at the time, Syrian president, were involved in it to a certain degree. And there was no accountability. And I thought that was a great idea. Like, for me, it was something we needed. And I think every power in the world needs somebody to check on it. That's my reason to come here in the United States. Am I satisfied or not? I don't think it's fair to say I'm not satisfied because, again, I was looking for a utopia. And it's not fair to think, okay, I didn't find it here, so this country is bad. I think humans are all the same. That's what I found after so many years traveling and living in different cultures and learning different language and different traditions. I think what makes any country great is its people, and it's the ideal they follow. I think any society in the world can be a great society if they have the right ideal. And there's in the book so many examples that when I first came to the United States, I met people who were absolutely wonderful, remind me of my ancestors, the way they welcome stranger and help them out.
Riyad, we have another question for you.
Sure.
This one, sorry, Jordan. This one's from Mary. She says, I was surprised to learn of your legal background. I had assumed you were a trained chef. Café Raqqa serves the best Middle Eastern food in Middle Tennessee. Where and when did you learn to cook?
I learned to cook. There's an accident in my life when I broke my both toes. I have to stay home. And we don't have TV. My TV is the women in the neighborhood come congregate at our house, drinking coffee and gossip until I get sick of it. After 2 episodes of that, I decided I don't want to hear any more of that. So I asked my mother, just put me anywhere, give me something to do. And I started cutting vegetables. While I'm sitting, I cannot do anything, either watch the street or just help her prep for a meal for that day. That's my first training as far as goes cooking. Then I started really learning cooking because I thought cooking belonged to my culture, to my roots. And it's type of science and history. And I start, every dish that we talk about has some kind of historical point behind it. So that's how I really start into the cooking thing. After I decided to open a business and I know I cook the stuff I ever said, I'm going to feed the people the food I ate growing up. I know how to cook it. But I did a little bit extra in it by perfecting it and bring it to a perfection, trying to bring clear and good and healthy pictures to where I am here in the United States. And I remember my father just so many times when him and I were walking in the Eastern Market, he said, I don't care what are you going to do in life, just be the best of what you do. And that really rings in my head all the time. Doesn't matter what you do, just be the best of whatever you want to do in your life. Just be the best of it. So I always strive to reach that.
Excellent. Brad, I had a follow-up question to that. In the story, it talks a little bit about a gentleman who took you aside before you left, and showed you some secrets of what he knew and what he had learned and been taught about how to cook.
Yeah.
And I was curious, did that guy do that for everybody? Did he know that you needed this? And did you see it that way? And how much of what he taught you do you still use today?
I think I'm using his recipe verbatim. Yes. It's like, I really didn't have much of, I have instincts of remembering things. And when he took me on the side, in the story, it was a conflict. The book doesn't talk much about it, but my father went to my uncle and he gave him a warning. He said, either you give this man his right share or I'm going to rule against you. It's a tribal ruling. And that man chose my father to be the judge. And my father, in his position in the tribe, he's capable to render his judgment, and he'll make sure to be enforced too. So at that point, that man found it it's very unreal for my father to sided with him. He was a stranger. He's from Aleppo. He wasn't from the city. He's not related to us. but he was absolutely wrongly done. At that point, he found out he wants to give my father something valuable, but he's not a wealthy man. I was leaving. He thought, okay, that's something I could share with you. In Syria, probably you could find in every city 1 or 2 hummus masters. And there's only maybe in 2 hands you could count them at the time in the whole country. And he was one of them. Like if you have an Iron Chef of Syria, he will be an Iron Chef. Let's put it that way. That's his status, his class, his accolade in the business. So when he taught me this and he told me, he said, don't take it as a business you want to open. It's just a knowledge for you, he told me.
Right.
And yes, yeah, I use his falafel and his hummus recipe until today, exactly like he showed me, never deviate from it.
Wow. Well, we have time for one more question, and we do have one more question, so that works out perfectly. This question is for Jordan, and it is from Julie. She says, I've read many of your articles, and the world needs journalists like you today more than ever. Are you going to return to your journalist roots, or do you have another book project in mind?
That's very, very kind. Thank you, Julie. And I mean, the answer is yes to all of it. Yes to both. I love the rhythm of my work is typically I write a story about once a month or so, typically when I'm in the rhythm of writing stories at the Ringer. And I love the rhythm of that work. I love following my curiosity and going where it feels like there's a story that's that needs to be told and that I might be in a position to be able to tell well. It's a thing that makes me feel alive and that I love deeply and want to very much want to continue doing. And feel so grateful to have people at the Ringer who empower me to do that kind of work. And I also want to write more books. Writing this book was the most satisfying, most rewarding experience of my professional life. One of the most rewarding experiences of my life, period. And I want that again. I want to be able to sink that deeply into stories, and I see the two as interrelated. This book is different than a piece of kind of straight news reporting for sure, and it's maybe in some ways even a little bit different from a piece of feature journalism. Riyad and Bashar were kind of involved in shaping the story in ways that, as a journalist, you typically don't do. So I did do some things a little bit different with this book, but I still feel it as an extension of the journalistic work I've done at the Ringer and at other places. And I love it all and very much want to continue doing all of it. Every day that I get to do this for a living is a day that I consider myself just unbelievably lucky and blessed.
Well, we appreciate you writing this book and joining us today. Riyad, thank you for sharing your story with Jordan and with the rest of the world. And please pass on our thanks and best wishes to your family when you talk to them all over the world where they are. So I want to thank everybody who joined us online today. And if you enjoyed this session and would like to support the festival financially, there will be a donate button posted in the chat section. So those donations are greatly appreciated. If you do want to buy a copy of Road from Raqqa, please do it at the parnassusbooks.net/SF link. Thank you so much to Jordan and Riyad, and y'all have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.